I love Apex Legends because almost every time I play, whether I had a great time or I tilt out, I know that I did not waste my time. Not necessarily in the sense that what I am doing directly results in a better real-life situation, though it can, but instead in the sense that if I'm going to play a video game at all, I want it to mean something, and Apex does. Allow me to explain. Halo Infinite is a great way to describe this feeling by describing the opposite. And in doing so, you'll be able to understand where I'm coming from when I talk specifics regarding Apex after this. So, Halo Infinite. The newly released face of Microsoft with 6 years and $500 million in the making is somehow hemorrhaging its concurrent player base at a frightening rate. You don't have to look far on YouTube or Twitter to see the community speculating as to why that may be. And while YouTubers are focused on predatory microtransactions, a cheating problem, and broken matchmaking, hundreds of thousands of other gamers are too busy enjoying Apex Legends to notice. A game that also has a matchmaking problem, a cheater problem, and predatory microtransactions.
It only took $160.
How can that be? Well, obviously by this we know that Halo's real problem isn't any of what the YouTubers list, or Apex would be suffering in a similarly catastrophic way. No, if Apex is doing fine, Halo's problem must lie deeper, and only one thing goes that deep: the gameplay itself. Shocking, right? Who would have thought that the reason nobody wants to play Halo Infinite is because they don't want to play Halo Infinite? Well, you'd be surprised. The modern trend of game critique is to blame everything but the gameplay when it should be the opposite. As we see with Apex, despite the cheating or any other problem, we still play the game and enjoy it. So the next logical question comes to mind. Just what is that feeling which makes us want to grind a game even with all these problems in the way? And if these issues aren't what keep us away from Halo, what are? Before we go there, don't get me wrong, the things I've listed are problems and both games would be better off without them. Yet, Apex has held onto its player base and even grown it over time, while Halo has not. So what is it that makes us want to stay or quit? Circle back to what I opened with. We've established that gameplay is the true crux of holding player interest, and what matters most about gameplay is that it offers a meaningful experience for the player. Video games are interactive media. We interact with them to embody the variable that makes the difference, so that our personal impact is the deciding factor in the outcome of whatever happens. That is especially true in a competitive PvP game where the entire point of participating is to overcome other real people using our own abilities. That's why every time we die from something we can't control, it frustrates us. It's also why we question the motive of cheaters. When I die and spectate one of them, I think to myself, what's the point of even playing as a cheater? How is it fun to take the skillful and interactive aspects of a game and automate them with an aimbot or wall hacks? It's a really good question, but unfortunately for all of us, cheaters have reasons to keep at it, like getting a high rank that would otherwise be unattainable, or even just to enjoy ruining the experience for other people. However, that doesn't change the fact that for most of us, we play games to play, to get better, to use our abilities to become the deciding factor and chief influence in the outcome of a game. So for us, the majority, cheating would spoil the fun completely. And in the same vein is Halo Infinite's gameplay design. If that seems like a leap, just hear me out. So sure, Infinite's matchmaking sucks, but the battle rifle aims itself. With self-resetting recoil and enough friction so that not touching your right thumbstick is how you aim well, the primary competitive utility weapon is very easy. That's all you say? That's more of a problem than matchmaking? Well yeah, that's all it takes. A first-person shooter with minimal skill in the shooting can be fun for a while if the guns sound good and the feedback is satisfying, but if what you are actually doing is not meaningful, what you are doing will eventually feel like a waste of time. And Infinite's gameplay loop lacks meaning because so much of what we are doing is not us. That's the heart of the issue. In a competitive shooter, there are only a couple places where skill can emerge and afford the opportunity for our input to make the difference. After all, remember, that is the whole reason to play a game, right? To be the variable that makes the difference? Well, in Halo, generally speaking, positioning and shooting are largely what facilitate that difference. So now consider how 343 has taken 50% or more of that formula, the shooting, and automated it for the player via high friction on an effectively hit-scan utility weapon that actually rewards you for aiming at the chest instead of the head, and maybe now you can see why there's a mass exodus. My aim in Halo Infinite is really good, but that doesn't mean anything because so is everyone else's. If by contrast my aim in a game like Apex Legends is good, that reflects practice that I've tried, and as a result I can now do something many others cannot. And so now my personal progress will impact the outcome of the game and my experience because I will easily beat the players who haven't tried. That means something. The reason for participating in a PvP experience is being fulfilled, and that is the difference. Every time I play Apex, I can improve my shot. In Halo Infinite, or if you just flip on cheats, everyone can aim well for reasons outside of themselves. Either because in Halo, a sandbox designer tuned magnetism high enough to ensure as much, or because in the latter case, I just bought an aimbot. Either way, it's not me, and that's how they are similar. It's not my skill or practice making the difference. However, in Apex, I aim well because I worked at it, and my input is allowed to be worked at because Respawn didn't hand everyone self-aiming weapons. There is room to improve because the guns are tuned by developers to be hard to use via projectiles, recoil, and relatively speaking, less aim assist for controllers. In layman's terms, there's a skill gap, and that's it. That is what makes us want to grind a competitive game all day. And that is what Halo Infinite does not have enough of. That's why it feels meaningless to play. It's like being a rock climber stranded in Louisiana without any cliffs to entertain you, and all you get is this hill. Even the first time climbing it wouldn't be interesting, not to mention 10 more years of it. When you consider as much, it only makes sense that we would stop playing Halo. While Apex is a mountain that is yet to be ascended. Technically, you could triple wingman headshot 3 people in a row with a super glide tap strafe wall bounce between each kill, but nobody has. Yet. Yes, both Halo and Apex still offer the skill of positioning and mental play, which is extremely important, but even that aspect of the experience has been diminished in Halo Infinite. For the sake of time, I won't get into that, as this is supposed to be an Apex video, but the point remains. If you diminish the skill gap, you diminish the player's interest in sticking around, and no, cat ears in the battle pass won't bring them back. Shifting our focus back to Apex, here's where my arguments could be used against me. The flawed elements of Apex, the things which hinder the skill gap and dampen our personal impact as players, could now be brought up by the skeptic to counter the generally positive message I have about the game. But the thing is, I likely agree with them, hence the title. I don't like RNG or wall hack characters or campy level design or any other pitfall of the Battle Royale genre, but I still want to grind the game because Apex has enough depth to keep us, and that's really the whole point of what I've been saying so far. Despite numerous problems, the gameplay has what it needs. Yet, it could have more, and that's why I'm here. So, with our foundation laid, we're safe to start building. This is what I love and hate about Apex Legends. Apex must be one of the best to ever do it on the gunplay front. The projectiles, kill times, it all combines to create a magical dynamic which most other FPS titles can only dream of offering. The potential to make insane plays, killing multiple people on your own and surviving to tell the story. That's what can happen when shooting is hard and perfect kill times are swift. Projectiles are especially important to this formula. They introduce depth and beautifully balance for range without arbitrary damage or aim assist fall off. The further someone is, the more you have to lead, the harder it is to hit them. It's a no-brainer really, a self-balancing win for the designer and a skill to master for the player. Yet most other developers have yet to embrace it, opting for hitscan instead. Such a shame. Recoil is an interesting part of Apex. I think recoil control is a perfectly respectable skill to have in a military shooter, but so often the recoil patterns are unpredictable or just too weird to fully learn. Luckily, I don't think this is a huge problem in Apex, but in general the patterns are subtle enough that even the best player doesn't really preemptively adjust for every little part of the pattern because it's not viable to. Look at this R9 spray. It goes up, does a little crescent to the right, then comes back left and kinda shakes in place left and right. Yeah, it mostly just rises, and so we mostly just pull down because the rough nature of the pattern is often too subtle to perfectly adjust for, which can make us miss. Fortunately for us, this can also help us hit shots we didn't mean to. If you use the flatline without jitter aiming, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the horizontal recoil will match the strafe of the enemy and just accidentally one-clip someone for you. So while it can be helpful, it's all by accident, meaning that neither of these situations are a good thing because neither is fully controlled by the player. So while I think gunplay just may be the single strongest element of Apex, I'd love to see recoil patterns simplified and strengthened to the point that we can viably trace them. Instead of this, maybe something like this. Then we could even increase recoil strength across the board, which hypothetically could retain the current balance of average kill times through an increase in difficulty, all while the player gets more control. On top of this, I'd love for weapons to have more distinct patterns from one another. The car, for example, is basically just the R9's recoil mirrored. It'd be cool if each gun was its own distinct shape to learn. All in all, this is a small thing, but revamping spray patterns could make a big difference, and with a change like this, I may love the gunplay even more than I already do. Oh, and Respawn, please remove flinch. It's not even strong enough in Apex to actually balance anything, so literally all it proves to do is periodically frustrate us when it happens to screw us over. No thanks. On to movement. So often the movement skills in FPS games turn out to lack a certain input requirement. For example, in Halo 5, the thrust ability is always going the same distance, the same speed, and is on the same cooldown no matter how mechanically talented the player may be. Yes, thrusting introduces a kind of movement skill into Halo because it still takes spatial awareness and intelligence to use the ability well, but the input itself is as simple as pressing a button and it goes. There's no way to coax additional speed or distance out of the ability via input, and there's no way to fail. In Apex, this isn't the case. Advanced movement techniques in Apex not only require the same spatial awareness and mental skill, but can be executed with greater and greater effect as you get better. Take wall bouncing for example. Not only do you have to think to use the ability in the first place, which is the mental skill, and then choose the right trajectory, which is spatial awareness, but to actually execute on it takes mechanical input skill. First of all, it takes timing. You want to jump off the wall right as your character would start climbing. Jump too early and you fail. Jump too late and you fail. Beyond that, if I strafe onto it and out of it, I can squeeze out an increased horizontal distance to run or chase. And there's a lot more than this to wall bouncing. All those subtle input changes result in this versus this. Going back to the Halo 5 thrust, nobody has ever once thrusted faster or further than anyone else because mechanical input skill can't influence the ability. The cherry on top when compared further is that most Apex movement is not a baked-in ability, but simply arises out of the sandbox naturally, so you don't need a button for it. It is truly the superior example of movement and something that most games don't get right. I don't think developers often understand what it is about this that is compelling. That the input itself of a wave dash in Melee or a flip reset in Rocket League is a massive part of the equation, and so is the emergent nature of these things, being that these skills occur naturally through players experimenting with combined sandbox elements. To restate this all as simply as I can, I don't think we'd call anyone in particular a cracked movement player with the Loba teleport ability, but I think we'd all agree that Lou is cracked with wall bouncing. You see the difference. Input-based movement can be iterated on mechanically, while abilities often cannot. This isn't always true, like with Pathfinder's Grapple, but it's enough of a trend in other games that I felt compelled to point out that Apex generally gets it right. So it's safe to say that I love the movement in Apex Legends. Though, honestly, I am starting to worry about it. Something called punch boosting was recently removed, which was simply punching the ground behind you on a slope or ledge to give yourself a little boost forward. You could use the physics impulse from the melee to go a little faster, which is exactly the kind of emergent sandbox gameplay we like to see. It was niche, not that effective even in the most extreme circumstances. It was something that every input could pull off, and it contextually and physically made sense. It's one of the clearest examples of good emergent gameplay I've ever seen in a video game, and it was removed, which is what worries me. I just hope Respawn respects and embraces the emergent skills which make their game unique from other shooters, and look to games like Smash Melee and Rocket League to see why it's so important to let these things be as long as they don't break the game. Last thing about movement that I'd like to mention is how frustrating and unnecessary dead sliding is. You know, when you go to slide and just crouch in place because you are 0.1% off the momentum threshold for a slide. Yeah, I think it would only benefit the game to make sliding feel more like it does while in Bloodhound's Ultimate. I'm not saying to make everyone this fast, but when you are in the Ultimate, your increased velocity makes it so that dead sliding doesn't really happen even with your gun up. I think this is just how the game should be made to feel all the time. But again, I am not saying to make everyone that fast, just make the slide function that way. Thirdly and finally for this chapter of things I love, we need to be celebrating Respawn more for having made an active effort to cut down on RNG within the Battle Royale mode. Beacons to see where the zone is going, the banner and respawn system, Evo shields, spawning with Evo shields and healing items, more and more loot on every map that comes out, the crafting, and so on. They've done more than any other BR developer by far to dampen the effect RNG has on gameplay, and these changes have been met with universal praise for good reason. However, my compliments shift to criticism at precisely the same place these barriers against RNG come to an end. Apex is the furthest along in regards to this sort of integrity. We've gotten a taste of what it could be like to play a BR without any unnecessary RNG involved. A hint at glory. And with every change in that direction, the game gets better. But with that being said, the closer we get, the more I want them to go all the way, and here's exactly why I think they should. About RNG. Upon extensively thinking about this subject as it relates to BR games and with Apex in mind, I've come to the conclusion that RNG is not the reason why this genre is compelling like some have said. Sure, there is going to be inescapable RNG with so many teams on a large map because it's impossible to perfectly track them all, but it's not the randomness of this experience that makes it fun. On the contrary, it is the agency granted to you which comes from one big arena that compels us. Think about it. The fun part is landing wherever you want, going wherever you want, and trying to be the last squad standing however you want, all while being a one life mode that gets your heart pumping. The fun part is not getting third-partied or getting shafted on loot or dying to a zone that keeps pulling away from you. Nobody likes that stuff. In reality, the open-ended nature of things, while being high stakes because there's no respawn, is what made this genre so potent. As such, just because this mode introduced some unpredictability didn't mean that we needed to design more in. Apex is proving this one change at a time. You'd think that if piles of RNG were integral to the formula, that all they've done to stop it would hurt the game, but it's accomplished the opposite. Again, this is a PvP game. Don't let the prowlers fool you. When players are pitted against each other, any unnecessary randomness only hurts the experience as it directly contradicts the express purpose of a PvP game, which is to determine who plays better by who wins. And unpredictable elements like random loot will often punish us regardless of what we did. And therefore, sometimes whether we win or lose has nothing to do with us, and we've all experienced how terrible that feels.
Give me a gun! You fucking idiots!
The only real argument I've heard in defense of something like random loot is that it creates opportunities for bad players to have a little fun because they could get lucky. Well, first of all, the very premise of this idea is silly, but even if I did entertain it, it doesn't hold up. A bad player can only benefit from luck for a very short time at the beginning of each game before a good player inevitably amasses loot for himself by killing people just to put himself on the same level as you or higher, meaning that not long into the match, this dynamic flips on its head and goes the other direction. This means that the only way to really benefit from lucky RNG as a learning player is to drop hot so that you can cash in on your good fortune before it's too late. But new players generally don't do that because they recognize that landing hot is a good way to die over and over, and they just want to learn. Yeah, this doesn't really work. I'd say the far better way to help the new player out would be for loot to become predictable. Suddenly, they can now create a plan, get the gun they want, and then they'd likely be encouraged to go fight more knowing that they have what they need. What better way is there to ensure a new player has a good time in your PvP game than offering a clear path forward towards improvement? I think that breaking down barriers for new players to start that journey is great. At the very least, a much better way than random advantages, while at the same time a shift in this direction towards predictability helps the hardcore player by killing off that age-old frustration of getting screwed by loot, which seems synonymous with battle royales even though it doesn't need to be. Apex has proven that added randomness is not an integral part of BR design, and it hurts every kind of player. So I don't see a reason to flirt with this change any longer. It's time we went all the way. How would I do that? Well, I'd personally just hand place loot. Imagine you landed this building in Frag East, and every time without fail in this specific spot, there would always be an AR with ammo, and over here there'd always be a shotgun. If you're at all skeptical about this, think about those crates in a few places on Stormpoint and Olympus that essentially always have good loot, like the middle of the mill. If you have any reservations, start landing there and just experience for yourself how much more fun it is to know you'll almost always get what you need. You won't need to listen to another word I say to start agreeing with me. Also, think about why you hate Kings Canyon, as I'm guessing you do. Bad loot, third parties. Anyways, beyond set ground loot, I'd even go so far as to see objective upgrades like magazines disappear from the loot pool. This way, weapons can be fine-tuned for a specific magazine size, and we can prevent straight up losing gunfights because you had no mag in your wingman and fought a purple mag rampage. Aside from being annoying, at the end of the day, there's just nothing interesting about objective upgrades because there's no situation in which you wouldn't want a bigger mag. There's no choice or thought involved for the player, it's just better, and it's often extremely frustrating. It's a lose-lose. I think the same logic can be applied to barrel stabilizers, bigger backpacks, or any other no-brainer pickup. If it isn't thought-provoking and it's potentially harmful to gameplay, it just doesn't need to be there. Clean up the loot pool, clean up the gameplay, and lose nothing for it. There's so much more I could say about this, but to ensure that I actually finish this video, I'll call it there. I'll just state that I think Respawn should take a step back, communicate with one another, and ask themselves why they've made the changes they have towards predictability, and why everyone loves it. Follow the logic to its foundation, and it should become clear where to go from there. Next up, let's talk about level design. Since the beginning of Apex, all the way back in Season 0 on Kings Canyon, I remember being thoroughly impressed with Respawn's level design. They were the only BR developer to create enough large-scale segmentation to make the rotations of teams predictable. If you paid attention to where people dropped and paid attention to the zone, you had a good idea of generally where they would show up via choke points, and that was something other BR games did not offer. More than that, the individual buildings themselves seemed to be designed in a way that allowed us to punish campers, with all the holes and cracks you could shoot through on the roofs of these buildings outside of Bunker and in swamps, or via the porous nature of the buildings in Skulltown. If you asked me back then, I'd be very optimistic about the future maps of Apex because it seemed that Respawn understood FPS level design in a way that other developers didn't. But I think I've been proven wrong about that. At this point, my best guess as to why buildings were designed that way in Kings Canyon was just that they happened to have holes as a consequence of 3D artists making them that way. I say that because the following maps, World's Edge, Olympus, Stormpoint, all ended up being filled to the brim with the safest, campiest, and most stalemate-inducing level designs I've ever seen. I can't tell you how many times I've landed cascades just to loot my one building, then stop moving because 4 other teams are posted up in all the other buildings. If you play Apex, I don't really think I have to explain why a team camping is frustrating because you've most definitely experienced it. So I'd like to just skip ahead and propose a solution. I'm a level designer, that's my discipline, and I'm making a game fulfilling that role. And one of the most important lessons I've learned for PvP level design is to always allow the player to succeed. In other words, there should always be something I can do to advance the situation. Something I can do to make a play. When you design geometry, whether you realize it or not, you are designing in certain playstyles and designing out others. You are encouraging some things and making others impossible. I'd like to make the case for designing maps in a way that encourages pushing, taking space, making plays, and punishes teams who choose to sit and do nothing. The best way to do that is to simply give every spot and every building some sort of geometric counterplay. Think back on the buildings in Kings Canyon. Camping in them is possible, but can be countered because a team who knows the map can utilize the holes on the roof to punish you for staying still. That's an okay example of what I mean. Give players something, anything to do about it, even if it's just one window or one hole in the roof of every building. This would make a massive difference in Apex, and would probably create massive meta changes in the comp scene, in my estimation for the better. I want to see a world where aggression is a strategy, a world where sentinels are allowed to run through everyone. And now, legend design. Just like with level design, I was initially impressed with Apex. There was a surprising amount of interplay with legend abilities, while Respawn also avoided making free kill buttons like other hero games so often do. There was a mental and mechanical skill cost to get use out of your abilities, and I always appreciated that. Fast forward 3 years, not so much. We've got stuns, flying, one-way shields, and a whole lot of campy defense characters. Slowly but surely, Respawn has gone away from a more subtle and skillful design approach to new legends in favor of more powerful and objectively rewarding buttons that are only balanced by their cooldown length instead of a more inherent approach. It's not too bad yet, but if I were Respawn, I'd think twice about adding another stun or scan. Finally on my list is the grenade system. This may be surprising, but I think this is one of the biggest areas where Apex could be immediately improved. First of all, the grenades in Apex are generally spammy and unintentional. Frags have a long fuse timer, so you kind of just throw them in a general direction and hope they roll the right way. Arcs travel at the speed of light, so most sticks are an accident, and thermites are just annoying, half of the time hurting you more than helping you because of the visual clutter they create. The grenades themselves need a revamp. Vertinating is cool because you can get good at it and you can actually place your grenades. So let's get more of that. I propose we slow down arc stars to create more intentional sticks like with Halo plasma grenades, and remove the stun because it's definitely too punishing to get stuck when there's a stun on top of that. Then maybe allow frags to be cooked, or design the fuse timer around bounces like Halo frags so that you can know where they'll explode. And finally, please reduce the visual effect of thermites so that we can see through them. Then, beyond individual grenade design, I think Respawn should add 2 dedicated grenade slots along the lines of heat shields so that everyone could hold 2 and only 2 grenades. Unless you're fuse, of course. A change like this would prevent the annoying, unpredictable, and uncounterable grenade spam of a Loba team who's collectively holding 15 frags and throws every one of them at you. We've all been there, and I think we could all do without it ever happening again.
They threw a bird, they threw another bird, they're throwing a lot of birds. Oh my god. Man. Holy fuck.
Well, that's it. That's all I got. Man, this video ended up being much longer than I intended, and I still feel like I cut out half the subjects I wanted to cover. Visual clarity, sound bugs, the ranked system, and more. I'll just have to leave the rest of that up to you guys, the Apex community. Stay vocal. Respawn is one of the few developers that listens. And stop dogging on people like PvPX who clearly only want the best for this game. A wise man once said that it does not benefit you to fight those who fight for more. Thanks for watching.